Hi, this is Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. So, someone wrote in with a request for me to do a video about friendship. I don't know where we're going to go with this. I guess we'll find out, which is usually how these things work for me. Because in thinking about friendship, it is a relationship with someone else that isn't necessarily defined by intimacy of physical nature, but I think that the term friendship includes relationships that are also intimate in nature. Because if you're not friends, per se, with the person you're closest to on that level, then you don't really have a healthy relationship. Anyway, my brain's been running around in circles trying to think of what are the things that are involved and how they apply and what terms to use and all that other stuff. So, guess we'll just jump in and see where we end up, which is how these things usually work. So, any kind of relationship with someone, one of the more important aspects of a relationship is obviously communication. Being able to communicate with someone what your needs are, being able to understand from them what their needs are, to be able to evaluate whether you have enough common ground and so forth. So, communication is difficult for a lot of people. There's different styles and forms of communication. Some people are verbal, some people are tactile, some people are a combination. The way my brain works, I'm a literalist. When I have auditory or written communication, the very first inference, meaning that I put to the words that I either see or hear, is the literal interpretation of those words. I know this about myself. It's just sort of the way my brain functions. Because of this, sometimes I miss certain nuances when people are communicating with me. I can misunderstand their intent or what they're saying in some cases. Um, I always have to be cognizant of this as something to just kind of watch out for. And so, no matter what your style of communication is, if you're trying to connect with someone else, you need to find a common ground communication style, be it language. Obviously, that would be a barrier for some people. If you don't speak the same language, that could be a problem. And not speaking the same language can mean not just speaking in a different tongue, dialect, or so forth, but it can also mean having different definitions for the common words that you use to communicate with. So, defining what those words are in any kind of relationship is one of the earlier steps on in developing a relationship with someone. Because if they don't know what you mean by a certain word, and you don't know what they mean by a certain word, then your talk is sort of at cross purposes. You're not really communicating. You're saying words, but meanings um, are not connecting. And at its core, relationships are about making a connection. And that's true of other types of relationships, like relationships with the planet or with spirits or with magic or whatever it happens to be. It's like this is sort of an all encompassing ideal, idea. Um, yeah. And the fact that, we don't come to any relationship that we have, no matter our age, as a blank slate. We come, like people like to say, you come with your own baggage, but I'm not sure that that's a good term to use because it sort of implies something negative that you have to work through in order to become clear, which can be the case. But It doesn't have to be. It can be a challenge to unravel and unwind the things that you're coming to based upon your personal history and experience and the way your brain and heart work and so forth, what you're looking for, etc. So then there's a good example, like what does the word baggage mean to people? Obviously, to me, the phrase bringing your own baggage has negative connotations. Where does that come from? Things I've seen on TV, the way people respond to the sentence, um, the idea that baggage is something you have to cart around with you wherever you go. And is it good baggage or bad baggage? I don't know. So, yeah, when we start to use words, things can get pretty murky pretty quickly. And words is really one of the only ways we have to communicate with each other, especially through this kind of a medium. So, words are one of the things I have to rely on. But how someone receives those words is not really my responsibility. That's one of those key things. It's like you need to know what is your responsibility and then know what is not your responsibility. And it's a give and take kind of a situation. No one is going to come, like I said, a blank slate. So we are all like a conglomeration of history and reactions and expectations and projections and biases and all of that stuff. So if you're going to find someone who's compatible, even in a superficial sense, you have to have some criteria that you follow. You're not going to like everyone you meet. Not everyone you meet is going to like you. You're going to push some people's buttons and never even know why. Other people are going to push your buttons and you may or may not figure out why. It's like nothing is clear cut. Becoming a human being is what I focus on, trying to become my most authentic self. And in any kind of relationship, there has to be some kind of common ground. And figuring out what are the things that are important to you is like the first step to figuring out whether you want to be friends with someone. So there's like levels of things that are important in my view. Uh, I would not be able to be friends with someone who was a child molester. I don't feel any compulsion to try and understand where they're coming from. I don't want to have anything to do with them. I wouldn't be able to be friends with someone I knew was a rapist. Again, same kind of thing. Those are rather large things, of course, but sometimes the large things help you to start coming down and define what the other things might be. There's plenty of people who have differences of opinions, and opinions aren't necessarily a deal breaker when it comes to being friends with someone. But if those opinions embrace, like the two things I just spoke on, or other kinds of attitudes, I am personally not interested in having a conversation with a racist and trying to understand where they're coming from either. Someone who is abusive to a spouse or a child or a significant other or a group of people just because they happen to be members of a group of people. I have a hard time with people of certain types of prejudice. I don't believe that that's a good path to take. And if I'm going to share my time and energy with someone, I am going to be selective with who I share my time and energy with and what I put my focus on. So, in a broad sense, knowing what is and is not okay with you helps to narrow down potential friends in all realms, be they physical or spiritual, because I have those same criteria when it comes to working with spirits and so forth. I am not going to align myself with some kind of a force or deity or whatever that would promote or be okay with any of those things. And so, it's a matter of first self-defining and then evaluating what are things that are okay to be different about and what are things that are deal breakers. Because if you don't have some deal breakers, you have absolutely no boundaries whatsoever. and and you're never going to actually make a real friend, because if you have no boundaries, no one's going to know who you are. So they can't decide they want to be your friend in the first place. Yeah, sort of touches on a lot of stuff there. So, no matter what kind of relationship you have, potential conflict is always something on the horizon. Misunderstandings. It can be a simple turn of a phrase, like we talked about briefly, or it can be something bigger, because we have our own triggers, each of us, including the person you want to get to know, but you have to know what your triggers are so that you can illuminate, educate the person you're close to with what those might be so that they can decide whether or not that's a deal breaker for them, or if they are willing to modify a certain behavior, or if you want to change your triggers and do some shadow work, personal work, whatever kind of work, in order to understand and deactivate those triggers. Because, like I said, we're a collection. You have your childhood, however your childhood was, whether you were an orphan, whether you were in an abusive home, whether you're one or more or both parents like died when you were young, or a parent deserted you and left you, or you had a happy home and everything seemed to be fine. It doesn't matter. It's not like the specifics, it's just the understanding of the fact that we come from really a wide range of different kinds of experiences, not just how our specific brain works and how we interpret those experiences, but the experiences themselves. And, as an empath, I make a lot of my decisions based on how someone will feel about certain things. But then I also realize that I can't necessarily make all of my decisions based on that, because there's more than one person in the world. It's not just me or just them. And I'm human and I make plenty of mistakes. Communication is something I'm getting better at all the time. At least I hope so. But it's not something you ever perfect, because there's too many variables in communicating with another person. Even if you grew up with them in the same household. Like, okay, so my sisters and my brother, we all grew up in my incredibly dysfunctional and abusive household. Some of us were there for more of it than others, like my youngest sister doesn't have the same kind of traumatic memory events built up like I did, because I was the oldest, so there's a range. But then my brother had completely different kinds of experiences because he was the boy, and my father treated him differently because he was a boy. Not better, but very differently. And the things that people tell you when you're young stick, and they stick hard. Um, not coming up with a good concrete example at the moment, so I guess I'll give that some space and see what comes up. But you add that, that's just one layer. And before even that comes into play, you've got your biology. You've got your sexuality, your potential sexual identity, that comes in later. But as a young child, that isn't usually much in play. Well, unless it's your parents that are making it in play, so never mind. That could also be a factor even then. Um, the environment that you're raised in, the way the people around you communicate or don't communicate. In my case, there was a lot of yelling, a lot of breaking of dishes, a lot of terror, violence, and that seemed to have been like the main form of communication. Talking reasonably with someone was not actually allowed. um, and the other thing, too, is that when you're a child, the mindset that you have, which is a normal mindset, is that everything that's happening is about you. And this becomes a problem when you get older if you don't get out of that mindset that everything is about you. If you don't realize that it's no longer true, everything is not about you. Everything is usually about them or about other forces that you don't have any control over. It's rarely actually about you, because if you think about all the stuff that you have coming to the table and how different your reactions can be or your responses can be depending upon your background, then you begin to realize that that's true of the other person as well. So there's this mix of these various experiences and backgrounds and so forth, and that mindset that it's all about me, if that hasn't been dealt with, muddies the water, because then that becomes the filter that you use to interpret everything that someone else says. So try that as an exercise sometime, whether you think it's part of what you're dealing with or not, just as an interesting exercise, and take a conversation that you're having, which seems like a pretty typical and normal conversation, and look at it through the lens that everything that person said and did was all about you, and see how that can change the meaning of the entire encounter. If you are stuck in that position, that can give us a lot of insight, I think, into how we deal with the universe. And certainly, as a person who's been around longer and has gone through a lot of different kinds of relationships, and has done a lot of work on myself, I have gotten to the point where in this juncture at least, most of the time I know that it isn't about me, it's about someone else, whatever it is that they're going through. So I see that a lot in people around me, where they still think it's all about them, and it makes it harder for me to communicate with them, because then everything I say is on its head, and that particular filter is attached. And so, not just that kind of thing, but say if you have a deep seated insecurity, you think you're not good enough, that there's something not right with you, or people aren't going to like you for this reason or that other, then that's another kind of filter that you use to interpret what someone else is saying to you. And it happens in reverse. So, yeah, it is complicated. No one said it was going to be easy to talk about this. Um, yeah, so getting out of yourself and out of the center of your universe and thinking that everything is about you is a very important and good step to take, for sure. And the reason we talk about boundaries a lot is because defining yourself means it's possible for someone else to actually get to know you. You can't really know an amoeba very well, someone who has no corners or edges or changes shape whenever the conversation shifts. You don't know where they stand. I don't anyway. I have a hard time with undefined individuals because I feel I can't trust them. I'd much rather know that they're an a-hole and that's where they're at, and okay, I can decide what I'm gonna do about that, like not have anything to do with them, stay away from them, know that they're not a friend, they're a potential hazard to me, know their place in my scheme of things. Um, so I really don't care for undefined people. I don't mind when people are confused, are growing, are transforming where they're at, and not changing their core in the process. Because, like, I see that as you're like letting fall away things that aren't actually you, things that you've acquired, things that you've adopted, things that on some intellectual level you think you should be that isn't really you. Going that, step inward to find out who you are at your core and then who you want to be if you don't like who you are, and taking steps to change that, becoming different. That's not what I object to at all. Because, like, for example, with my husband Ian, when he and I first met, we were the same people and we're very different people now than we were then. Um, Giving someone else their self autonomy to decide who they want to be and how they want to grow, what they want to learn, when they're ready to interact, and so forth, is a part of a healthy relationship, I think. But you don't want to take that information and then turn it into something like, I'm not allowed to ever speak my own mind, or what I think isn't important, or what I feel isn't important. And, because that's not what we're talking about either. Again, nuances, complicated communication. So, so one of the first things is to know what your deal breakers are in any relationship. And there should be some deal breakers. You figure out what they are for you, and what is not okay. Like someone who tortures animals is not okay with me. Someone who yells all the time, not okay with me. Someone who uses uh, manipulative, emotional manipulation to try and get their way, not okay with me. Um, yeah, it's just that kind of thing where you know when it is not okay. And I've had a few people in my life who have stepped across whatever that line is in the sand that I have. And when that has happened, they have become dead to me. I have been connected to them before and then not connected to them after. One of my former housemates is a good example of that. He and I got fairly close. Um, he had his own agenda in his head and things he was thinking of. He decided that I wasn't a very good parent. He was going to help me learn how to be a better parent. He just thought that my son was the head of some kind of drug bicycle theft ring in our community. He came to me with his concerns, and I said, I don't see that. I, and without evidence, I'm not going to assume that. So then he took it upon himself to try and get evidence to prove that to me. He went to the police. He told them about my son, tried to get them to believe him that he was indeed this like nefarious youngster teenager who was in charge of all these things. And while it's true there were a lot of bicycles that went missing, it turns out my son had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with it. And the police didn't seem to be interested. I wonder why, because there was nothing there, maybe. And he took it upon himself to start following my son to try and get evidence, because I had said that without evidence, I'm not going to believe it. And he decided he must be right. He was going to get the evidence and he was going to prove it to me and like make me come to my senses. So after 2 years, apparently, of him doing this, he came clean one day and told me what he had been doing. And that was the end of our relationship completely. It didn't matter to me what had transpired before, how close we may have become. He had crossed the line. He had threatened my child. He had been a thief in the night, like skulking around. He'd been ungenuine. He had been doing things behind my back. There were so many red flags that that was it. It was He was dead to me. And I never interacted with him again on purpose. Although he did find me after the earthquake when I was in Santa Cruz and went through the earthquake. My son was actually not long after the earthquake went to Marin County north of San Francisco to stay with a friend, which I thought was probably fine because it was farther away from the epicenter. And this person, I had moved out of the house and I was living in a different house. And this individual came over to my house, knocked on my door, and wanted to talk to my son because another bicycle had gone missing. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry to tell you, but my son's not here. He is like, 100 and so miles north and hasn't been here for a while. So if your bicycles are going missing, it's nothing to do with him. He was like a dog with a bone. He couldn't let go of it. He became obsessed with this notion. And obsessive thoughts, intrusive thoughts, is a bad thing. I mean, it leads to poor decisions on the part of the person who's having them almost always. And so, he's a pretty good example of what I mean um, by that. But to be fair, that's a fairly extreme thing. I don't just drop people off of the face of the earth for small quote unquote infractions and lack of understanding or comprehension of what I'm talking about. I work at a relationship, and there's another word, working at a relationship. Now, for some people, that means it's a task, it's a chore, it's a something that you're forced to put energy into, whether you want to or not. And for other people, working on something is a joy and a pleasure, and it gives you insight and opportunity. So, another example of how words can have such vastly different meanings depending on your experience with them and all the other factors that are involved in it. So, you have all of that. You also have spiritual and religious beliefs. Um, a lot of times, if they're at odds with each other, that can be a deal breaker. We've only ever seen one relationship where there were two people that we knew who had vastly different belief systems, and they were able to make that okay by completely honoring the other person's system of beliefs and not feeling threatened by the fact that the other person didn't believe what they did. And it's a surprising thing that very few people can do that. It should be the norm that a person's spiritual and religious beliefs doesn't have to be a deal breaker, but I've seen some pretty unhealthy relationships where it certainly was a factor. I had a client who was very Christian, and her husband was not, and she was constantly trying to convert him to Christianity, and it put a huge strain on their relationship. Understandably so. He did not like it, and that's the thing. Is like acceptance of the person, who they are, and where they're at, is another vital part of being in a healthy relationship with someone. And the couple that we saw the vast differences in spiritual and religious belief system. One, the woman was a Mormon, and the man in this case was a pagan, and it didn't enter into their relationship. It was just their own private thing. And they had pictures on the walls, Jesus on one wall and God of the Hunt on the other. And there wasn't any friction because they weren't trying to force the other person into believing what they believed and respected one another's right to believe whatever they wanted to and didn't see it as a personal threat or an affront to their beliefs, a statement. That's another thing is a lot of times people are offended by someone holding different beliefs, not so much because of the nature of the belief, but because they think it's all about them again. And so someone having a different belief system means that they think your belief system is wrong because they have a different one and obviously they think theirs is right. And sometimes there's more conflict there than there needs to be because of that. Yeah, people are complicated. And being able to trust your own instincts, you've got that little voice inside of you that will often say, yeah, warning, this person's not okay. And any number of times we're trained by our environment to ignore that voice for whatever reason, whether it's cultural, environmental, or what have you, or we just don't have any confidence in our own instincts, or we think that by listening to that voice, we're not giving the other person the benefit of the doubt, maybe we're wrong, or what have you. And I say poppycock to that. Maybe you are wrong, but that doesn't matter. If you don't listen to that voice, you almost always are going to be sorry. And you don't have to justify. Emotions are not rational. And that's the thing, is like I've been with certain people where one of their controlling tactics is to try to make you explain how you feel, why you feel a certain way, and then take issue with your reasons for feeling that way. I'm like, okay. And feelings aren't rational. They're not logical. They don't necessarily have a straightforward explanation. They can maybe lead you to a core of a belief system or an experience that you've had that can explain why you feel a certain way to yourself, but you are never um, required to explain how you feel to someone else. And if someone wants you to, it's another red flag. Because usually people who ask that kind of a question are going to use whatever you say to try and manipulate you out of it. And that's how cults work. One of the ways cults work. You know, you're not supposed to have ideas of your own, and they're going to try and manipulate whatever ideas you think you do have into being wrong, and somehow they have the right idea for you to adopt. So it's very difficult to like be yourself. That's the whole point of a cult, is to not be allowed to be yourself. So listen to those instincts earlier rather than later. So like I was saying, when Ian and I first got together, we were different people, but we are still the same people at the center. I have like a place inside of me that connects everything that happens. That is my core self, I guess. The thing I think of as me, and that way I don't have weird inner conflicts with different aspects of myself and my personality because I connect them all to that center location. So that way, even though I'm looking out of a different lens or a different aspect of my personality or different levels of experience or different levels of connection with someone, it's still all coming from here, from that middle part. And I think that's part of what I call becoming a human being, a true human being, is I had another housemate, different one, who apparently would not understand that concept at all, because one day she came to me and asked me if I could give her a personality to try on for size to become, and she would do whatever it was I said, and I'm like, I can't do that. That's not something that I can possibly do. I'm not going to choose for you what kind of a person you should be. This is only something you can do for yourself. And the fact that she could ask me to do that was very weird. She was had some strange ways of thinking that I found confusing. And personal betrayal uh, is definitely one of the big boundary no-nos. There was another one person who was in our magical group, my first mixed coven. And I lived in a household with lots of different people. We were always getting new housemates and so forth. And um, they recommended this guy to come move in with us. And, we always did this thing with consensus. If any one person said no, then they weren't allowed to move in. And he used his position of being close to me and being in the group and so forth to influence me into not paying attention to my instincts. There was something in the background of my head when we were interviewing this guy to be a housemate. I did not know exactly what it was, but there was something there. Um, and I overrode that and agreed to let him move in because, he had such praise from this guy. Yeah, don't trust anyone else's instincts, only trust your own. And the guy moved in, and then he had a friend who was around the same age. They were like in their 30s, like early 40s. Um, and the guy that came around a lot after he moved in was very gregarious, really was into young boys, wanted to take all the boys out for pizza and a movie. I started to get suspicious of that behavior because what is a 40-something-year-old man wanting to do hanging out with a bunch of teenage boys? Something didn't seem right. And then one day I got a phone call from court system, and the police officer on the phone was looking for my housemate and his friend. They were supposed to be coming into court for sentencing for producing and importing child pornography. The gregarious guy was a photographer at the YMCA and had coerced any number of young men, boys, into posing for him, and then sent the film to some other country in Europe. I don't know if it was Sweden or somewhere, where they produced it into a magazine that then they imported back into the States, which is how they caught them, through the US mail, importing pornography. And they had skipped out on their sentencing and left the country. So I was pretty shocked, um, appalled, now understood my misgivings and what they meant. Contacted my friend who was in our group and told him, hey, here's what's happening. Did you know? And to my complete and utter amazement and surprise, he said, oh, yeah, but we just thought it was like a witch hunt kind of thing. They're just making that stuff up because we know him and he's a fine guy. I said, you do realize I have a teenage son who would be the prime candidate for this person? And I've told you about my personal history of being molested and all this other stuff. So are you saying that you didn't believe me when I told you what happened to me and you thought I was, what, making all that up? And I'm part of the witch hunt? And I was very upset. Again, a child is involved of mine. Again, my son, ironically. My protective mother instincts are very highly tuned, unlike my own mother. Um, and so while I was talking to him on the phone and getting this rather startling piece of information about this person that I thought I had known, realizing what was going on and what he thought, I basically told him, I never want to see you again. Never call me, never talk to me. If you see me on the street, you'd better go to the other side of the street because you don't want to be on the same side of the street as me, because you will regret it. Yeah. So that was someone I had thought was a friend, not a super close friend. There's a difference between like an acquaintance and a friend and, a long-standing close friend, and they all sort of have their own different boundaries that are a part of that kind of relationship. All of them, of course, should be acknowledging you as an individual and a separate being and with your own stuff and respecting your boundaries. So, yeah, so that was a bit of a surprise, to say the least. And like when I was in the all women's coven at the same time that I was leading the mixed group coven, the women in the all women's coven, they did some things that I found objectionable. It's like you have to, in a magical setting especially, you have to define your choices about what you're willing to do, what is okay. And several of the women in there were had been severely abused by family members, which I could certainly relate to, and they wanted to perform what I would consider a pretty much black magic ritual in order to get back at these individuals, which I could understand why they might want to do that, but I couldn't get behind it. And I said, no, I won't participate in that, which caused some friction in the group. To be fair, there already had been friction in the group because of the fact that I did not identify as a lesbian, and these women were militant feminist lesbians, and they felt I just hadn't made my choice. Guess they thought every woman should be a lesbian. It's like, to be fair, I'm bisexual, but yeah, um, but monogamous, so it doesn't matter. Um, and that was an interesting thing. And then I saw them do something to another member of our group, which I objected to as much, if not more. They were in my house at the communal household at the time, and one of the other members of the group had done a series of articles about violence in the lesbian community in our town because it was a subject that needed to be addressed, and there's just as much violence and dysfunction in same-sex relationships as there is in opposite sex relationships, because the dynamics of relationships is not dependent upon sexual orientation. It's a power thing. If there's a power differential, then it can become abusive. The person's not clear, it can become abusive. All that stuff. And she had done this series of articles, and the gay community in our town turned on her because she dared to bring up such a subject, which I was very confused about because, for me, knowing the facts and the truth is an important part of understanding what's going on around you. If the truth is hidden and nobody knows what's going on, you can't make good decisions. It's impossible to make a good decision with bad information. Something my husband likes to say a lot, and it's true. You cannot make good decisions based on bad information. It's not possible. And she was devastated and emotionally wrought and feeling very vulnerable and crying. And the two women that were the most feminist, militant feminists that were in the group were just like, you made your bed, you lay in it, that's the way it goes, and had absolutely no compassion whatsoever for what she was going through. And that broke up the group. I mean, I ended the group. That was a line that wasn't okay for me. And they had crossed it. And I went over to Susan, who was the woman who was having the breakdown, and put my arms around her. And I chewed out the other two women and told them in no uncertain terms that they were not welcome in my house anymore, and I was leaving the group. And they needed to get the hell out because that's not what this was supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about support. And this would be a good example of someone who needed support because she had the highest of ethics in doing what she did. She faced a very difficult subject with courage and heroism. It's like she was doing something for the community by airing this out as something that needed to be talked about. There were women who'd been murdered and had been assaulted and had been stalked and terrified and all this stuff, the same kind of things that you hear about other normal relationships, whatever that means. Heterosexual, I guess. It's more accurate. And so I kicked them out. And that was that time that they called me up on the phone and they wanted me to come back to a meeting so they could have closure, which is a moment I was actually quite proud of because I was feeling pretty confident in who I was and where my motives were. And if I was to blame for something, I was quite willing to take responsibility for it. And I also knew they wanted me to go there so that they could tell me what horrible person I was. And I thought, is there any reason for me to go for myself? And that's the thing in any relationship. It's not just about them, it's about you. And if you're not getting anything out of it at all, and they're just taking advantage of you or abusing you or whatever, that's not a friendship. That's an abusive relationship disguised as a friendship. um, anyway, I talked about this on another video, but I went there because I thought it'd be interesting to see what they had to say, what kind of projections that they had developed. And sure enough, I sat there and every one of them got up and told me how I had made them feel belittled, betrayed, insignificant, brought harm to their soul or whatever it was, and with what I did, etc. And and all of it was projection because none of it was actually any intent on my part. It was all their experiences and their interpretation of the rituals that I planned based upon their experiences and everything else. And also group mind, joining together against the common enemy, which had been me suddenly. And so when they were all done telling me how bad I was, I said, okay, so you've all had your opportunity to tell me what you think. Now it's my turn, right? And they said yes. And I went through and I told each one of them what it was that I thought was the best about them. And I meant every word I said. I didn't lie or make things up. There were a lot of really good positive attributes that I quite admired, creativity and passion and all kinds of things. And I just went through each and every single one of them. And when I was done, I stood up and I walked out and never spoke to any of them again. I have no clue how they processed that. It didn't matter to me because it wasn't about that. They wanted closure, so I got some too. Surprise! Yeah, people are often surprised by the things I might pull out of my hat. So, there's a lot of different kinds of situations that can be a cause for finding out what is a line that you won't allow to be crossed and have no consequences. It gets muddier for people when it's family, blood relatives, because of how we're raised and how, the idea that blood is thicker than water, which is actually not what that phrase apparently means, but the idea that we've absorbed is that family has a pass, um, and they have a special dispensation because of that, which I disagree with too. Knowing the reality of what's going on and where they're at and what's happening. So back to my family and how different we all are. So my brother, who's just a little bit younger than me, he's like the second oldest, has become as misogynistic and a-hole as my father ever was, and has denied all the things that happened in our childhood and put all that behind him and sort of embraced the identity and has um, disconnected completely from our family, like doesn't want anything to do with us, partly because of me, like being a witch, apparently, because he became a Catholic, which is ironic. Um, and so he is like he has taken himself out of the equation, blocked everyone on Facebook, doesn't want to have any contact. I'm the epitome of evil. So yay, yay me. Apparently I can be very polarizing, apparently. Of course, one of my exes thinks the same thing and had to kidnap my children in order to protect them from me, but that didn't work because I got my kids back, so there, haha. Um, Having boundaries and knowing when to use them, a good thing. So, and then my next sister, she has gone through several incarnations. I'm not sure where she's going to end up. She was into Native American stuff for a while, which I thought was kind of cool. Now she seems to be uh, an anti-vaxxer and some other things that make no sense to me whatsoever. And if you're an anti-vaxxer, I'm sorry, I can't understand you. I believe in science. That's just where I'm at. And if that's a deal breaker, that's fine. You don't have to listen to anything I have to say. Um, and then my youngest sister, she and I have more in common than the other siblings, and we communicate regularly. And she is the person who's like taking care of our mother, who's now 94 at this point and living in her house for the last several years. Um, she was there through COVID, so it's been a while. It was before COVID she arrived. And yeah, so just because we were raised in the same environment and had some of the same experiences, my second sister, the one that's closer to my age, she's number 3. My youngest sister is number 4. There's only 4 of us. Number 3 had even worse um, sexual predatory trauma from the uncle in the family that went through all the girls and boys. He apparently was non-preferential. It was more age related for him, not sex. Um, yeah, I mean, and she forgave our father for all the things he did just before he died. And that was a choice I couldn't understand or comprehend, but I was, you know, it's entirely up to her what she does with her life and what she wants to do with the information she's been given. And although it's certainly a path I would not have followed because I consider all that stuff unforgivable, she did, and I would never try to force her to not forgive him if that's the path she chose. And that's the other thing, respecting other people's choices and allowing them to be who they are, because if you can't respect their differences, you really can't enjoy the similarities because it's conditional. You're just enjoying their similarities and hoping you can change their differences to become more like your similarities and, get closer that way. So Ian and I have different approaches to magic, to spirituality, to personal evolution. We have different needs. He has his issues with, his panic and anxiety disorder. He needs to meditate because that's part of his, what's the right word for that? That's part of how he assists his own brain and body chemistry and helps with his panic attacks and so forth, keeps him more stable with what he goes through with that, which is something I can see happening, but I've only had a couple of panic attacks, and I'm sure the ones I've had have been a pale shadow of what he goes through. So accepting where someone is at and making sure that there's things that are compatible with you in other ways. It's interesting to be with someone as long as we've been together now. We've been together for 33 years this year. Come July will be the 33rd year of our first date. So we have a significant amount of time behind us. And I know that I have evolved and he has evolved, but allowing someone to change when you're with them allows the relationship to change too. And like there's all these shows where we've just grown apart, we're not interested in the same things anymore. We have plenty of things that we're both interested in. So the more overlap that you have of common ground and so forth with someone, the better chance you have of that relationship lasting for a longer period of time. The ability to respect them as a true individual and not to try and hold them to a pattern that they've had in the past and try and make them fit that. I'm sure you guys have experienced that kind of thing with um, like going home for the holidays and you get into your old house and all these old patterns just surface and come bam back up. And then you're like, oh my, why am I acting this way? Why does this make me behave this way? Why do I feel this way? And it's because the expectations of the people you're visiting, they remember how you used to be and what you used to be like, and have their expectations, and you sort of fall into old patterns. So you don't want to be in a relationship like that where people expect you to stay the same and not see the changes and not see the sameness either. I mean, because you are the same person, energetically speaking. You've gone through different stuff, but you are still you at the center of that. And so a lot of people find it very difficult to transform themselves when they're in a relationship because the other person in the relationship, be it like a intimate love relationship or a friendship, want to keep you the same, the way you were, and not have you change, because then that changes the dynamics of their relationship with you and makes them have to work. So that's part of it. In the lines of communication, learning how to actively listen and be in the moment is a meditational exercise in and of itself. If you can sit in a room with someone and listen to them talk for 10 minutes without interrupting, without having any random thoughts of your own, without having your mind wander, without having some key point you want to make, and you're just waiting for your opportunity to jump in to the conversation in order to make the point, then you're not actively listening. So it's a practice, and it's a good one to have. I think that's one of the reasons why I have a different kind of relationship with the Fae, is because I'm trying to sort of pull in any expectations, prejudices, biases, and try to be as present in the moment as I can when I'm having an experience. So I'm more likely to understand something about what's going on. And the whole world is about relationships, not just with people, obviously, with plants and animals and the world, the whole biosphere, etc. And these principles that we're talking about are things you can bring to that table as well. Um, And just remember to be kind to yourself when you make a mistake, because you will. I have, I do. And being able to let go of the mistake, apologize for the mistake, and move past it, and not then bring it up again, which is something a lot of people will say they're sorry and they've forgiven you or something like that. And then, like a year later, all of a sudden it's back on the table and they've brought it out of a dark closet from somewhere. And remember the thing you said to me when blah, 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 blah happened? That still hurts. So they didn't really accept your apology and allow you to move forward. And they didn't move forward either. That's a whole nother thing. Um, so it's an exploration and an experiment, an amazing experience to be alive and to have all these facets and forces and thoughts and ideas and notions and emotions and feelings and all of that stuff, and try to figure out how to navigate it. And some people are going to succeed better than others, and it could be because they've been here before and they've got more experience under their belt. May not have anything to do with anything else except they have more experience. And the more experience you have, the more likely you are to put a few things together and to get to the point where it doesn't matter what other people think of you so much. It's interesting. So I went on for quite a while, and I looked down at my clock and I'm like, I can't believe like almost an entire hour has gone by. So yay to the person who suggested I talk about the subject. Apparently, I had plenty of things to share, and I'm always surprising myself. Hopefully, there's been something in here that resonates and something that you can work with or ask questions about or what have you, because, we're in this giant experiment exploration together. And it's questions that allow me to dig deep and find answers that I don't think I have, or maybe that I don't have, but I'm willing to share anyway. So, if you need to send me a message, you can send it to Siofras Magic Alcove at gmail.com, or you can friend me on Facebook, Siofra Bradigan, and join our private group there. We've got like, I think, 101 people in that group at the moment. Um, or you can put in the comment section of this and ask your question, and I'll do my best to answer. I always try to answer questions to my best of my ability. People may not always like my answers, but that's the way it works. If you want to ask me a question about my opinion, you're going to get me and my opinion, not some AI bot and their opinion, which YouTube offered. And I said no. Um, so yeah, hopefully this has been informative and interesting and fun and entertaining and thought provoking and all those other things. So this is Siofra Bradigan, and this has been Siofra's Magic Alcove. Blessed be.